Most perennials bloom for 3 weeks. You spend 11 months staring at leaves and 3 weeks enjoying flowers. Then you do it again the next year. 3 weeks of colour out of 52. That is what most perennial gardens deliver, and most gardeners have just accepted it as normal. I accepted it as normal for longer than I want to admit. I had borders full of plants that looked incredible in early June and completely bare by the 4th of July. I thought that was just how perennials worked. It is not. It is not a perennial problem at all. It is a plant selection problem. The plants that bloom all summer exist. They have always existed. Most gardeners simply are not choosing them. The 11 perennials I am going to walk you through today bloom for 3 months minimum. Several bloom for 5, and one of them blooms from June until the ground physically freezes. I grew it for the first time 8 years ago, and it changed the way I think about every border I design. 3 weeks is not a bloom season. What these 11 plants deliver, that is a bloom season. I have been building perennial borders for over 30 years, and the first decade I did it wrong. Too many plants that peaked the same week in June. Nothing planned for August. And by October, my garden looked like it had been abandoned. It took me 10 wasted seasons to realize the problem was never my soil or my climate. The problem was that nobody showed me how to choose plants specifically for how long they bloom and when they start. My neighbor across the street asked me 2 years ago why my garden still had color when everything else on the block had gone brown. I told her the names of 5 plants. She wrote them on the back of an envelope, planted them that fall, and last summer, her front walk had colour from May through October for the first time in 20 years. The answer she got is what I want to share with you right now. By the time we finish, you will know exactly which 11 perennials carry continuous bloom from May through October, the one maintenance move that extends each one, and how to layer 5 of them together so your garden never has a single gap week. If this is useful to you, I would appreciate it if you passed it along to someone whose garden could use the same information. Here is what I want you to understand before we start the list. The reason most gardens go bare by midsummer is not neglect, and it is not bad luck. It is because the default approach to flower gardening is built around annuals. You buy flats of petunias every May. They look gorgeous through July. They fade in August, and they are dead by October. Then next spring, you spend the same money and do the same thing. I did this for 12 years. 12 years of buying the same impatiens, watching them die, and starting over. Nobody at the garden centre ever told me that a single perennial planted once would bloom for 4 or 5 months every year and come back on its own the following spring without me spending another dollar. That is not because anyone was trying to mislead me. It is because annuals guarantee you come back every spring. Perennials do not. Once you plant a perennial that blooms for 5 months, you never need to replace it. That is a terrible business model for a garden centre, but a beautiful one for your yard. Every plant I'm about to show you blooms continuously for at least 3 months. Several go for 5. And the way they overlap means you can build a border that has colour from the last spring frost to the first hard freeze without a single annual. Everything I have told you so far is the concept. The next 11 plants are the proof. And the first one is a plant most of you already know. You just did not realize how long it actually blooms. Number 1 is coneflower, Echinacea purpurea magnus, hardy in zones 3 through 9, which covers most of the country. It blooms from June through September, 4 solid months of colour. The flowers are 3 inches across, with pink-purple petals radiating from a raised orange-brown cone, and on a sunny afternoon in July, a mature clump of them practically glows. 3 feet tall, upright, and completely at home in heat, drought, and the kind of neglect that would kill most perennials. I planted 3 coneflower crowns along my front walk 7 years ago. They filled a 12-foot stretch, and I have not fertilized or replanted a single one. The deadheading trick that keeps them going is simple. Snip each spent flower head down to the next lateral bud on the stem. Within 10 days, a new flower opens from that bud. Keep doing that through July and August, and the plant just keeps producing. Stop deadheading in late August and leave the final round of seed heads standing. Goldfinches eat the seeds through winter, and the dried cones add structure to an otherwise bare garden. If you want a compact version, Powwow Wild Berry stays around 20 inches and fits smaller borders. White Swan gives you pure white flowers for a cooler palette. Number 2 is Catmint, Nepeta Walker's Low, zones 3 through 8, and this one blooms from May through September. 5 months, but only if you do one thing that feels completely wrong. The first flush of lavender blue flowers covers the plant from May through late June. Beautiful, billowing mounds of soft purple blue that spill over walkway edges and hum with bees from morning to evening. Then in early July, the flowers fade, and the whole plant starts looking tired and sprawling. Here is where most gardeners go wrong. They leave it alone. What you actually do is shear the entire plant to 6 inches from the ground. Every single stem. Cut it all back. It looks brutal. It looks like you destroyed it. My husband walked past the border 3 years ago, when I had just finished shearing the catmint, and asked me if something had gone wrong. Nothing went wrong. Within 3 weeks, new growth covers the cuts, and by mid-August a full second bloom emerges that lasts until frost. Without the shearing, catmint gives you 3 months. With it, 5. No other perennial I have ever grown responds to a midsummer haircut this dramatically. That 3-week recovery window is the price of an extra 2 months of bloom. It is the best trade in perennial gardening. Everything I have shown so far needs at least some deadheading or cutting back to reach its full bloom potential. The next plant on this list blooms for 4 months without you touching it once. Number 3 is Coreopsis moonbeam, Coreopsis verticillata moonbeam, zones 4 through 9. Blooms June through September, 4 months without any deadheading at all. The flowers are pale lemon yellow, tiny individually, but produced in such staggering volume that the entire 18-inch mound looks like a soft yellow cloud from even a short distance. I have one planted next to a deep purple salvia, and the combination stops people on the sidewalk. The threadleaf foliage is fine and airy, almost feathery, and it stays tidy on its own through most of the season. If the center of the plant opens up and gets leggy in mid-August, and sometimes it does, cut the whole mound back by a third. It rebounds within 2 weeks and finishes the season looking fresh. But even if you never touch it, it blooms and blooms and blooms. This is the plant I recommend to anyone who tells me they do not have time to maintain a garden. It does not care whether you maintain it or not. Number 4 is Blanketflower, Gaillardia Arizona Sun, zones 3 through 10. That is nearly the entire country. It blooms from June through October in warm climates, June through September in cooler zones. 4 to 5 months of flowers that look like tiny sunsets. Red petals tipped in gold, 3 inches across, on 12 to 14-inch stems. This plant handles extreme heat and drought that would wilt most other perennials on this list. But here is what separates Blanketflower from everything before it. Every other plant I have mentioned so far is permanent. You plant it, it lives, it comes back for years. Blanketflower is short-lived. Individual plants last 3 to 4 years, and then they are gone. That sounds like a problem, until you understand what happens next. It self-seeds so reliably that the patch renews itself without you ever replanting. The garden replaces its own losses. A friend of mine planted a $6 container of Arizona sun 4 years ago along her mailbox strip. The original plant died last winter. The 7 seedlings that replaced it are blooming right now in a bigger, denser patch than the original ever was. She did nothing. The garden did it. Do not fertilize Blanketflower. Do not overwater it. Rich, moist conditions actually shorten its life. Lean soil and full sun are what it wants. Mesa Bright Bicolor is the taller variety at 18 inches if you need more height in the border. I want to pause here for a moment. We are only at number 4, and we have already covered May through October between these 4 plants. If you stopped right here and planted just these 4, your garden would have color from late spring through mid-fall. But here is where I need you to shift how you are thinking about this list. Having plants that bloom for a long time is only half the equation. The other half is making sure they overlap, that when one plant is winding down, another is ramping up, so there is never a week in the middle where everything looks tired at once. Most perennial gardens do not fail because the plants are bad. They fail because the timing is wrong. Everything peaks together and crashes together. What you actually need is a relay. One plant handing off colour to the next, week after week, so the border never goes dark. That handoff between early summer and late summer performers is exactly where most gardens collapse. The next group of plants solves that collapse. They start blooming in July, right when the spring flush is fading, and they carry straight through to frost. These are the gap fillers. The plants that keep a garden alive through the months most gardeners have already given up on. And one of them, the one that does not stop until the ground physically freezes, is still ahead. Number 5 is Black-Eyed Susan, Rudbeckia fulgida goldsturm, zones 3 through 9. Blooms July through October, 4 months. Golden yellow, 3-inch flowers with dark chocolate centers on sturdy 2-foot stems. This plant begins blooming after most spring perennials have finished and carries through until frost without stopping. That July start date is exactly why it matters so much in a designed border. It picks up precisely where the early bloomers start to fade and fills the hole that kills most gardens. Deadheading extends the show, but honestly is not required. The plant produces new flowers continuously, regardless of whether you remove the spent ones. There is a reason goldsturm is the most widely planted perennial in American public landscapes, parks, median strips, corporate campuses. Landscape designers choose it because it is reliable, tough, and it never stops flowering even under total neglect. Divide your clumps every 4 years in early spring to keep them vigorous and prevent the center from going bare. I have a mass of 12 plants along my back fence that lights up gold every afternoon when the low sun hits them. My neighbor calls it the garden that glows. Number 6 is reblooming Daylily, Hemerocalis stella d'oro, zones 3 through 10. Blooms May through September. 5 months through multiple bloom cycles, and the way it achieves this is unlike anything else on this list. Each individual flower opens in the morning and is finished by evening. One day. That is it. That sounds like a terrible deal until you see what a mature clump actually does. It produces so many buds that dozens of new flowers open every single week, one replacing the last without pause. The trick to maximum rebloom is specific and worth getting right. As soon as the last bud on a flower scape finishes, snap that entire scape off at the base. Do not leave the bare stem standing there looking spent. Within 2 weeks, a new scape pushes up from the crown. Then another, then another. I get 4 to 5 complete bloom cycles from a single Stella d'Oro between May and September. Golden yellow trumpet flowers on 14-inch scapes, compact enough for the very front of any border. Happy Returns is the lemon yellow version with the exact same reblooming habit if you want a softer, cooler tone. We are halfway through, and we have covered May through October. But I want you to notice something about most gardens in August. They are exhausted. The spring plants are done, the heat has set in, and the colour just disappears. That August collapse is where the difference between a good garden and a great one shows up. The plants that carry a garden past the point where everything else quits. Those are still ahead on this list, and one of them does not stop until the ground physically freezes. We will get there. Number 7 is Salvia Maynite, Salvia nemorosa, zones 4 through 9. Blooms May through September. 5 months with regular deadheading. Deep violet blue spikes on 18-inch stems, and the colour is so saturated it almost looks artificial against green foliage. The first flush is the strongest and the most striking. Dense upright flower spikes that pollinators absolutely cover. Bees, butterflies, everything with wings. As each spike finishes, cut it back to the basal foliage. A new spike emerges from a lateral bud within 3 weeks. Dedicated gardeners get 3 full flushes per season from this single plant. It won Perennial Plant of the Year for exactly this kind of relentless performance. Deer ignore it. Rabbits ignore it. Drought barely slows it down. Now, here is the design note that matters more than any growing instruction I can give you. Plant Salvia Maynite directly behind yellow Coreopsis moonbeam. The violet-blue spikes rising behind that soft yellow cloud is the classic summer border combination, and it is classic because it works every single time. 2 plants, 2 colours, 5 months of simultaneous bloom from both of them. That pairing alone is worth building a border around. Number 8 is Scabiosa butterfly blue, Scabiosa columbaria, zones 3 through 8. Blooms June through October, 5 months of continuous flowering, and I mean truly continuous. Most perennials bloom in flushes. A wave of flowers, then a pause while the plant gathers energy, then another wave. Scabiosa does not work that way. It produces lavender blue pincushion flowers individually on long, wiry stems, 12 to 15 inches tall, and as long as you keep snipping spent flowers, new buds open within days from the same basal clump. The plant never takes a break. It never has a gap week. There is no pause between flushes, because there are no flushes. It simply keeps producing flowers from early summer until hard frost shuts it down. I planted 2 of these at the corner of my front border 5 years ago, and from June through October, there has not been a single day without at least a few blooms showing. Not a single day in 5 years. One caution, in zones 7 and above, give it afternoon shade. Full-day summer sun in hot climates burns it out and shortens the season considerably. And here is the thing, we have 8 plants now, and every one of them contributes to a relay of colour that runs from May through October. But I want to step back from the individual plants for a moment and talk about what happens when you stop thinking about them as separate flowers, seek in, and start thinking about them as a single designed system. Up to this point, you have been collecting individual plants, good plants, long-blooming plants. But a collection is not a garden. A garden is what happens when those plants are arranged so their bloom windows overlap, and their colours amplify each other, and their heights create depth from front to back. Each one of these perennials covers a specific window on the calendar. Catmint and Stella d'Oro open the season in May. Coneflower and Coreopsis carry June and July. Black-eyed Susan picks up in July and runs through October. Scabiosa fills from June to October with no interruption at all. When you layer 5 or 6 of these together in a single border, the colour does not come in isolated bursts. It flows. One plant is peaking while another is just building steam, and by the time the first one fades, 2 more have taken over. That is not gardening by accident. That is not even gardening by effort. That is designing a bloom relay, a system where every plant has a job and a calendar window and a reason for being exactly where it is. The last three plants on this list are the ones that complete that relay. They are the closers, the anchors that hold the whole system together through the months most gardeners have already surrendered. We have 8 perennials so far. Any 5 of them give you continuous colour. But the plant I would choose, if I could let grow only a single perennial for the rest of my life, that one is almost here. Number 9 is Veronica Royal Candles. Veronica spicata, zones 3 through 8. Blooms June through August, 3 months. Compact at 15 inches with dense violet-blue tapered spikes that add vertical architecture to any border front. Sunny Border Blue is the taller version at 20 inches with deeper colour if you need more presence in the middle of a planting. What makes Veronica worth understanding goes beyond this single plant. The deadheading technique it teaches applies to dozens of other perennials in your garden. Do not just snap the spent spike off at the top. Cut it down to the next lateral bud below the spent flower. That lateral bud was going to remain dormant for the rest of the season. It had no plans to do anything, but the cut forces it to activate and produce a new flowering spike. Each spent spike generates 1 to 2 new spikes from those lower buds. So the plant actually produces more flowers the more aggressively you cut it back. More intervention equals more bloom. It is counterintuitive. It goes against every instinct that tells you to be gentle with your plants. But once you see it happen with Veronica, you start applying the same principle to your Salvia, your Catmint, your Coneflower. One plant teaches you a technique that improves every border you own. Number 10 is hardy Geranium Rozanne. Geranium Rozanne, zones 4 through 8. And this is the one I have been building toward since the beginning of this list. This is the plant that blooms from June until the ground freezes. Rozanne blooms for 5 to 6 months of continuous flowering. That is the longest bloom season of any perennial commonly sold in American nurseries. Not the longest bloom of any plant I have personally tested. The longest bloom of any perennial most garden centres carry. Violet blue flowers with white centres, produced continuously on spreading 18-inch mounds, and the foliage is beautiful, even when it is not flowering. Deeply lobed, dark green, turning reddish in autumn. But here is what makes Rozanne different from everything else on this list. No deadheading needed. The plant drops spent flowers on its own and produces new ones without any intervention from you. No dividing needed, no staking needed, no shearing, no snipping, no cutting back. It grows in full sun or part shade. It won Perennial Plant of the Year, and if any plant has ever earned that distinction on sheer performance alone, this one has. Look, I have grown hundreds of perennial varieties over 30 years of building borders. If you told me I could only keep one perennial from this entire list, one plant for one spot in my garden, Rozanne is the answer without hesitation. Nothing else I have ever grown blooms this long, with this little effort. A woman who lives a few streets from me planted 3 Rozanne geraniums along her front steps 6 years ago. They bloom from early June until Thanksgiving most years. She waters them when she remembers to. That is literally all she does. 6 months of flowers from a plant she essentially ignores. Number 11 is Lavender phenomenal. Lavandula X intermedia phenomenal. Zones 5 through 9. Blooms June through August, 3 months. Now I know what you might be thinking. 3 months is the shortest bloom window on this list, and lavender is famously temperamental about drainage and humidity. So why does it earn the closing spot after a plant like Rozanne? Because lavender adds a dimension that no other plant on this list provides. It is not just colour. It is fragrance that hits you 6 feet before you reach the border. It is texture. silvery foliage so different from the green of everything around it that it makes the whole planting look more designed. It is 12 months of visual interest from foliage alone, long after the flowers finish. A garden built only on flower colour is missing something. Walk through one and then walk through one that has lavender in it. You will understand the difference immediately. It is the difference between looking at a garden and being inside one. Phenomenal was specifically bred for cold hardiness and humidity tolerance. It survives where English lavender rots, through Zone 5 winters and mid-Atlantic summers that would kill most lavender varieties before August. 2 to 3 feet tall, with silvery aromatic foliage and fragrant purple flower spikes that bees cover from dawn until dusk. The harvest trick extends the season and gives you something no other plant on this list can. Cut the first flush of flower spikes just as the lowest buds on each spike begin to open. Cut stems 12 inches long for drying. That harvest doubles as deadheading and forces a lighter second flush in late August that stretches the bloom window by 3 to 4 weeks. Full sun and excellent drainage are absolutely essential. Never mulch against the crown. Lavender dies from wet faster than it dies from cold. If you have heavy clay soil, a raised bed with sandy amended mix solves most lavender failures before they start. I keep bundles of dried phenomenal in every room of my house from July through Christmas. The garden gives you colour. Lavender gives you something you can carry inside with you. So here is where it all comes together. 11 perennials. Everyone blooms for 3 months or longer. But the real power is not in any single plant on this list. It is in what happens when you layer 5 of them together in the same border. Start with catmint and Stella de Oro for May. Add Coreopsis and Coneflower for June. Black-eyed Susan picks up in July and carries through October. Geranium Rozanne runs from June until hard frost, quietly filling every gap week in between. And Scabiosa stitches through the entire summer and fall without ever pausing. 5 plants. Continuous colour from May through October. No gap weeks, no replanting, no annuals. That is 22 weeks of unbroken bloom from 5 perennials you plant once. I started this by telling you that most perennial gardens give you 3 weeks of colour out of 52. I said it because I lived it for a decade. My garden did exactly that. A brief explosion in early June and then 11 months of mostly nothing. The garden I grow now occupies the same yard, the same soil, the same zone. It is not a different property. It is a different plant list, chosen specifically for how long each one blooms and when it starts. 3 weeks out of 52 was never a law of perennial gardening. It was a selection mistake I made for 10 years because nobody told me to think about bloom duration the way I thought about bloom colour. That catmint I sheared to the ground in July. The 3 weeks it took to recover is no longer the length of my entire bloom season. It is just the pause before the second act. Same number, completely different meaning. Pick one plant from this list, just one. The one that surprised you the most, or the one that fills the month your garden currently goes bare. Go to your nearest nursery this weekend and buy it. Put it in the ground in the sunniest spot you have. It will bloom this summer. It will come back next spring bigger and stronger than it was. And by year 3, that single plant will have taught you more about what a perennial garden can actually do than a decade of buying annuals ever did. Which one on this list surprised you? And which month does your garden go bare? The month where the colour just disappears? Drop both in the comments. That bare month is always the more interesting conversation, because once you know when your garden quits, you know exactly which plant to add next. That is where every continuous bloom garden I have ever built began, not with 11 plants at once, with one plant chosen to fill the one gap that bothered me the most. The garden fills itself in from there.